Intrepids, Rough First Draft. Written by Felicity Klein and Joseph Conkle. Part 1. Prologue. The Dangers of Tarkir.
"Come yourself, Hedgerig. There's nothing to worry about,"
the smaller, more homely giant Brennick said. Hedrig slowly turned to his brother-in-arms and chortled.
"Worry no longer after we've left this place. What purpose does the king have to call us to Verdolka? He's been so caught up with her grace, I thought he might leave us alone in Schlossstadt."
As the cart moved slowly down the road south towards Verdolka, the tension inside between Hedrig, his brother Brennick, and the two armed guards of House von Jotunheim, Roba, and Flungen was palpable. Hedrig remembered a simpler time where the good King Omen would call upon him week after week, seeking his advice on certain matters. Hedrig was always happy to help his friend. Over the past 30 years, though, that had changed significantly. Hedrig had not been summoned to speak to his friend, at least he thought he was his friend, since King Omen's marriage to Justinia Taranor, the same woman who had tried to court him after the battle at World's End. Sadly for her, Hedrig's heart was already spoken for. He wanted so badly to get back home and see Gila and his daughter Kara. Hedrig couldn't help but fiddle with the ring around his finger, wishing already, not even 2 days into their journey to Verdolka, that he could turn back and never leave home again.
"Don't worry, Hedgerig. I told you once, I'll tell you again. I'm sure this is going to be a short time in Verdolka, and then we'll all be back home. I mean, me, Roba, Flungen here, and in all honesty, what harm could they do? Also, on top of all of that, you're the king's man. I know you haven't spoken to him for quite some time, but I'm sure he'll trust you, Hedgerig. More than you could know."
As Brennick spoke, Hedrig stopped fidgeting with his ring and forced a smile.
"All right, brother. How about this? As soon as we actually get to Verdolka, I'll stop worrying. You know as well as I that these roads are not safe. It seems like it doesn't matter how much gold is spent, watchtowers erected, or guards sent on patrol, it never gets any better."
Hedrig sighed and his smile deflated.
"I'm going to sit out with the driver. I think I need some fresh air."
As Hedrig opened the cart door, he was confronted with a thick, dense forest, splendid evergreen and pine trees. He could hear the roaring of rivers nearby, the chirping of birds, and every once in a while the gallop of the hooves of a deer. The fresh air brought a smile to his face, a genuine smile. As he took in the scenery, he saw something that caught his eye. He saw a bright red flower with petals so long that they almost touched the ground. The red petals were trimmed with a pale white color. The stem almost looked to glow green. Hedrig was enthralled by the flower, but he knew who would love it even more than him. He shouted out,
"Stop the cart!"
and jumped from the cart onto the road. The portly human man driving the cart obeyed with a nod and brought the cart to a halt. Brennick popped his head out of the cart and yelled to his brother,
"Where are we stopping? I believe the driver had very clear instructions that we were to leave as soon as possible and arrive as soon as possible."
"I know what my orders are,"
Hedrig responded sharply.
You know how much Kara loves flowers."
He looked down at the bright red and white illuminated flower below him. The look that he had received from Brennick was at first disbelief.
"Well then, pick your flower and be done with it. The last thing we need is to tell the king that we were late because you decided you wanted to become a gardener."
With a chuckle, Brennick returned to the cart and joked with Roba and Flungen about Hedrig's gardening skills. Hedrig laughed at his brother's jest and reached down to pick the flower. As he reached out and grabbed the stem to pull it from the earth, the flower was warm, much warmer than the air currently around him. The flower felt like home. When the flower was completely removed from the ground, the luminescence didn't go away, and neither did the warmth. It traveled with the flower and with him. He pulled out a tartan-patterned piece of fabric, the same one that Gila had given to him so many years ago before he left for the final battle. Not knowing if he would come back, not knowing if that was the end of it all, or if her favor would protect him. He'd kept him safe all those years ago, so he felt it best not to ruin his run of good luck. He delicately wrapped the flower inside the piece of cloth and put it in his bag. He stood and admired the nature around him one last time before going to return to the cart. But as he turned, he heard the snap of a twig. At first, he thought that it might be a large animal, a deer or maybe even a bear, but most animals have a tendency to stay away from the road. Hadrig's muscles tensed as he heard steel on steel, a sword being removed from its scabbard, and the sound of feet on stone. Although Hadrig was a man of large stature, he also had the advantage of being quick on his feet for someone so big. As soon as he heard the sword drawn from his scabbard, he dropped to the ground and drew his longsword in one quick motion. Several arrows flew past where he stood and impaled themselves into the thick wood of the cart. He could hear Brennick, Roba, and Flungen scatter to grab their weapons and move out of the cart. Hedrig saw the driver panic and whip the reins. The cart sped off before any type of aid could exit, leaving Hadrig standing alone. He rose slowly and scanned his surroundings. As far as he could tell, he was outnumbered 5-1, 3 swordsmen and 2 archers. The swordsmen wore a smattering of armor, anything from chainmail hauberks, studded leather greaves, full-plate gauntlets, or animal pelt hats. It was obvious they were not an organized unit, but rather disenfranchised farmers, turn-cloaked soldiers, or poor men's mercenaries. As the 3 swordsmen started to inch closer and closer, Hedrig felt the grip of his sword grow tighter and tighter as he prepared for the worst. The 3 swordsmen started to charge, picking up their feet faster and faster and faster, and gave out a war cry. As the bandits approached him, Hedrig felt his muscle memory come to life. Time slowed around him. The 3 bandits charged, and arrows flew from the left side of the road. As the chaos closed in, he capitalized on their fervor. He watched as a woman to his right with red hair swung towards his torso. He tucked and rolled under her swing and ran past the rest into the forest to his right, away from the archers. As soon as he arrived 3 or 4 lines into the trees, he waited. And eventually, they came. One swordsman ran at him with fury and hellfire, wanting to cut him down and steal all the valuables he had on him. Hadrig would not let that happen. The first man with a pockmarked face took an overhead swipe at him, trying to bring him down. Hadrig met him with a strong horizontal parry. The clash of steel on steel rang, and sparks flew from the force of the swing. As the sword flew back and the man swung his sword around towards Hadrig's chest, he ducked, and with a diagonal upward thrust, the blade went through the man's throat. It stood no chance. Hadrig unsheathed his sword from the man's throat. It dripped with bright red lifeblood. Hadrig said a prayer for him and hoped he found whatever he was looking for, wherever he may be now. Before Hadrig could recover his breath, the other 2 were already on him. One with a black beard and the woman with the long red hair, both wielding short swords. They began to run at him. He could hear the arrows fire from beyond the road piercing into the trees around him. The natural protection had worked to his advantage. As both of them swung overhead from each side, Hedrig only had one choice. He blocked in a similar fashion, but as soon as he felt the steel clash, he embraced his giant's blood. It almost felt as though the vibrations from the clash caused him to grow. As his muscles flexed and as he yelled in pain from the extension of his body, he grew about 10 feet taller. He picked up the woman by her head and threw her into a tree. He winced at the noise it made as most of her bones broke and her body wrapped around the tree like leather on the hilt of a sword. The man with the beard screamed in fear and ran. Hedrig was relieved. He didn't want to have to take another life. He took a moment to breathe and say a prayer for the dead.
Raven, Crafter, Father Maker, hear my plea. Forgive this man and this woman of their wrongs. They deserve no torment. They receive their penance.
His voice rang out loud and deep. Hedrig's massive form seemed more monstrous than human. Whenever he embraced the blood of his ancestors and his body grew, he could bear a tremendous amount of pain. That tolerance prevented him from noticing the 2 arrows in his legs and 1 in his stomach. As he watched the blood leak out and felt the sting of the arrowheads lodged in him, Hedrig fell on one knee. He pulled out the flower he picked for Kara and realized she would never receive it. As he fell onto his back, sinking into the earth, he rubbed his face. The blood matted in his beard. He prayed one last time before the darkness took him. He did not pray for himself. All he wanted was Gila and Kara to be safe without him. Chapter 1. Franzi. After 3 weeks of traveling through the deep snow and harsh winds, the 2 fugitives finally reached civilization. As they approached the port town of Wexeny, Franzi watched as the snow began to fall slowly from a black sky. He could feel the icy wind, ever present, and he watched as it pushed snowflakes floating towards the ground. Franzi, and his new friend, if he could even really call her that, approached the gate with their hoods drawn. Each footstep crunched the fresh snow, leaving shallow footprints behind them. Franzi could see the lighthouse on the shore of the frigid strait signaling to the few ships that made their way into Wexeny on this cold, late night. Once the 2 of them reached the threshold of the gate, a cold voice shouted down to them, "Halt! State your name and business in Wexeny." Her voice rang out and was thick with the dialect of the northern regions of Tarkir. As Franzi looked to the guard who stood above them on the wall, he had a hard time thinking straight. It had been so long since he had been this close to someplace safe, a place that would actually be able to give him a meal that wasn't just winter berries. His stomach spoke for him. "Food," he blurted out. The guard looked down in confusion. The girl to Franzi's side, Kiva, saved them. "I'm sorry, ma'am. My younger brother, he's been so sick, and ever since our village was attacked several weeks ago, he speaks out of turn. I beg you, all we require is a warm place to stay and some food for our stomachs, and we will be on our way." Franzi looked at her in bewilderment. This was the first time she'd spoken since Miles, and it was a lie. She'd been so kind and respectful to anything they'd encountered along their journey. For her to lie now, well, Franzi didn't know how to feel. The guard yelled down at them, "What village?" Kiva looked at him with panicked eyes. Franzi tried his best to cool his nerves and spoke as sheepishly as possible. "We're from Cromlev, ma'am. The knolls of the White Woods, they..." He trailed off, trying to stifle a smile as best he could. Thank the, he thought. It ended as almost as soon as it began. Nothing. Franzi's eyes rolled at the thought of him, turning his amusement into annoyance. While deep in thought, he fidgeted with the gauntlet on his left hand, crafted of a fine bronze.
I am sorry for your loss. I did not realize anyone survived. Welcome to Wexeny. Our Temple of the Divines will have room and board you need. I pray that you find solace there.
With the bark of a command, Franzi could hear the familiar sound of a large plank of wood being unbraced from the gate, and the scraping of wood on stone as the gate slowly opened. As Franzi walked past the guards that opened the gate, he kept his gaze at his feet. He could see Kiva do the same. As they entered the port town, Franzi saw all of the buildings were caked in snow. A faint light from each home's hearth gently illuminated the windows. He also saw the smoke escaping from the old, weather-worn brick chimneys. As the pair entered the town, passing the different homes and closed shops, they noticed a building that still looked fully lit inside. The sign, wearing a cap of snow, read, "Icebreakers Inn." Franzi breathed out a sigh of relief. 9 hells, I can't believe we finally made it. As he said those words, he couldn't help but check over his shoulder just in case. And this is the safest he's felt in weeks, but he wasn't ready to let his guard down yet. Kiva gave him a tired smile.
Like I said, Franzi, the light would always lead us to safety.
Gesturing to the hearth illuminating the inn, brighter and hotter than any of the other fires in the city. She placed a hand on her golden amulet in the shape of a sun that never left her neck. Sure. Nice lie, by the way, Franzi cried.
The light gives me talents that I should respect but not abuse. Sometimes twisting the truth is necessary.
You don't have to convince me of that. Franzi already felt closer to her. Over the time they spent together, Franzi couldn't help but notice her sunny disposition that matched her physical appearance. He knew he could never match the energy Kiva always provided. Both of them were tired, but somehow she felt warm and pleasant. Often Franzi had a gloomy disposition, but even around Kiva he couldn't help but smile every once and a while. As they entered the inn, and Franzi pulled back his hood, he released a torrent of bright red curly hair that fell to his neck. He could feel the dark blue bags under his eyes. The color gave a stark contrast to his pale, freckled skin. Kiva kept her hood up even as they stayed inside. Franzi's muscles loosened as the hearth warmed his body. Looking around the inn, he noticed the well-used tables and chairs were made of pine similar to the rest of the building. Pine wood was everywhere. The torch's glow gave contrast and character to the bland, uninteresting room. The light allowed shadows to dance in the corners that may be hiding a small spider, seeking refuge from the cold. The clerk, a half-elf woman, sitting behind the bar counter, was reading a book, and barely glanced up as they entered. The only other person in the room currently was an odd, shirtless, red-skinned man sitting at a table with a bowl of tomato soup. Franzi approached the clerk. "Excuse me, we'd like a room?" Franzi said, gesturing to Kiva next to him.
I am sorry, but this is probably the first time in ages that we were full. We've had a lot of visitors to Wexeny that aren't friends or family of the locals.
Quite strange, really, she responded. Very. Thanks anyway. Franzi and Kiva stepped away from her. Well, I guess we're outside again.
I'm nervous that if we do that in town, we could be spotted. What about the Temple of the Divines?
Kiva reminded him. I'm not that desperate. Kiva put her hands on her hips.
You really think now is a time to be picky?
I'm not being picky. The idyllic order will be crawling all over that place by morning. You need a room? The shirtless man with the tomato soup said from a table not too far from the two. He looked quite a bit older than Franzi and Kiva, but was very fit. His skin was molten red, and his veins looked as if lava flowed through them. Besides being shirtless, his pants and boots were similar and looked ideal for physical labor.
Yes,
Kiva said with excitement. You kids look like you need a good night's rest. I don't mind sharing the room. I can even sleep on the floor. Kiva smiled big.
Thank you, that is so kind of you.
Kiva. Franzi cut her off and pulled her aside. We don't know this man. We don't know who he is. We're trying to stay hidden.
He's a fire primordial. There's no way he's involved. He's probably a merchant from the city of Brass who's trading here.
You don't know that. We don't trust him. We can't just blindly trust people.
I blindly trusted you,
Kiva said with her bright golden eyes staring into his.
Now trust me. I have a good feeling about this, and the light will never lead me astray.
He never has. Franzi rolled his eyes as she mentioned the light. He let the argument go. Fine, but if we get in trouble, it's on you. Kiva smiled and quickly hugged Franzi before going back over to the fire primordial.
We'd love to stay with you. I'm Kiva.
She reached out a hand for a handshake. He accepted the handshake. Malachite. I'm Franzi. Thank you, by the way.
Glad I could be of assistance. You both seem a bit desperate, and as of recently, I can relate.
Malachite wiped his mouth with a napkin, keeping his thick beard clean, and rose from his seat, bringing the now empty bowl of soup over to the bar counter for the clerk to take.
We're in room 204.
He then led the two up the stairs, which creaked under each step they took.
My friend,
he hesitated.
Evanora may not say much. We're both pretty quiet, which is good for us. I think she should have the bed tonight, though, if one of the two of you don't mind. She hasn't been sleeping well.
I don't need one, Franzi said. As the three of them made their way into the room, Malachite gently opened the door. Franzi's first look into the room gave him a sudden chill. A tall, ominous, hooded black figure was reaching out a bony, skeletal hand to a young teen girl sitting with her knees to her chest on the bed against the right wall. The image was there and gone in the blink of an eye. Franzi rubbed his eyes, full of shock from what he just saw. Malachite continued into the room, completely unaware. Franzi looked to Kiva, who clearly noticed what Franzi witnessed as well.
Evanora, this is Kiva and Franzi. They need a place to stay tonight, so I offered them my bed on the floor.
Malachite said. Evanora seemed almost like a ghost with her white skin and hair that faded into black at the end. She slipped on her black boots and grabbed a long white coat hanging from the bed frame. No problem. I'm going to be out late tonight anyway, so feel free to use mine too, she responded.
How late will you be out?
Malachite asked with concern in his voice. A raven landed on the ledge of the window of their room and cawed. I'm not sure, so don't wait up. Without another word, she hastily left the room, passing between Kiva and Franzi. Franzi looked over to Kiva, who was now forcing a smile, and gave him an uneasy look. He couldn't help but snicker at her. This was her idea, after all. Malachite scratched his head.
Well, I'm gonna go and wait downstairs, at least for a little while. So please, make yourselves comfortable. The room is yours.
As he walked out, Franzi noticed the large metal hammer leaning against the bed frame. The craftsmanship looked beautiful, and he couldn't help but admire it. Wow, this is incredible. Malachite turned.
Thank you, I made it myself.
No way, this is great craftsmanship.
Do you forge?
Of course he does. He's wearing the symbol of the crafter. He's gifted Franzi with an incredible talent, Kiva said, fixing the bed she chose to her liking. Franzi sighed as she spoke. Yes. The thought of his supposed god made him boil with contempt. He hated that his art was associated with some god rather than his own talent and practice. Before he let any of those feelings out, Malachite broke the tension.
So I suppose you made your gauntlet then. May I take a look?
He looked as though he was trying to smile disarmingly, but Franzi wasn't sure. He took off the gauntlet and carefully handed it to Malachite. He observed it closely.
You have a gift. I could never make something this intricate.
Franzi felt a smile try and make its way to his face, but he pushed it back down instead and shrugged in response, and then he took the gauntlet back. Kivda hopped into bed.
All right, I'm ready to sleep, friends, so save the fortune talk for the morning. Please, good night.
Franzi saw her fling the blankets over her head and a moment later begin to snore lightly. The entire journey she was able to do just that, fall asleep wherever and whenever. Franzi was sure she must have lived in the woods for most of her life from her ability to do that. The only issue was she had no skills in tracking or navigating the woods and would shy away from any type of bloodshed around animals. Franzi looked from her back to Malachite. The two shared a nod, and Malachite went to the door to leave Franzi, and he made his way to the bed and then blew out the candle, allowing the darkness to flood the room. Sleep began to come over his mind and body, now finally warm in a comfortable bed. His mind shot back awake, thinking about the terrible images he saw when they first entered the room. Franzi looked over to the Kiva, who was even deeper in sleep. He closed his eyes and calmed his mind. You don't believe in that bullshit. Gods, demons, the tales of the dawn, it's all made up to control you. Don't let it in. With his thoughts keeping his mind from wandering any further, sleep crept into his head, and every worry washed away. Franzi began to stir awake as the sunlight peeked through the curtains covering the window. He rubbed his eyes and sat up. His back still ached from the weeks of sleeping on odd floors and the snowy ground. Last night was much better, but not a cure for the pain. He cracked his back and noticed that Malachite and Kiva were not there. At that moment, Franzi thought he was alone. He looked around the room again, a little less groggy this time, and he noticed that strange girl. Evanora was now here, sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. She was awake, staring off into the distance. Franzi had no idea what she was thinking, no idea what she'd been through, but he could tell she was very much out of her element. The sound of crashing waves from a nearby coast, the squawk of seagulls, or the jeer from someone downstairs demanding another drink, it all made her jump or cock her head in one direction or the other. After he realized he was staring at her for too long, he saw she was staring back. There were no words exchanged, no emotions felt, just cold. She was a long abandoned hearth, a pit of sorrow and sadness. Franzi eventually broke eye contact and tried to leave the room as casually as possible. However, he could feel her icy gaze follow him as he laced his boots and walked out the door. The morning brought about more patrons, silently eating their breakfast, aside from one man who was already drunk. The sun was bright enough for it to be about noon. Scanning the room, Franzi spotted Kiva and Malachite at a table near the back. Malachite was sipping his soup slowly while Kiva quietly spoke to him, her toast left untouched. Franzi quickly made his way over.
Good afternoon, Sleepy,
Kiva greeted. It was the first morning where we didn't have to be up early, so I thought I would take advantage of it. Franzi said with a smile. I understand. I can't miss a beautiful sunrise, though. Plus, Malachite is wonderful company, and a morning person, too. She finally took a bite of her breakfast.
Your friend is an excellent storyteller,
Malachite said lightly. I believe it, Franzi said. She hasn't told me any yet. Kiva waited to be done chewing before she responded. I really don't have many stories, or, well, at least ones that are that fun to tell. She smiled sheepishly. Franzi saw pain behind her eyes. She took another bite of her toast and looked out the nearest window, feeling the warmth of the morning sun. So how did you and Evanora meet? Franzi asked. Malachite didn't look up from his soup.
I found her when she was in trouble. I'm not always the most daring, but I took a chance for the first time in my life. I can probably never go home again, but I don't regret being the person she needed.
Kiva, while listening, intently had her hand over her heart. She took Franzi's hand abruptly and pulled him over to the stairs. He's such a sweet man, we have to help him. Kiva, Franzi, they're in the same problem that we are. We help each other when we needed it most. I don't know about the girl, though. She seems almost... I'm not sure. She's not the most lively, but she's a little girl, and she could use someone like Malachite around. He rolled his eyes as she said that. She's probably the same age as me, Kiva. What? How old are you? 18. Huh. You seem older. Thanks. We can help them, and they can help us. He's strong, and he seems protective. I mean, Franzi sighed. We just don't know them that well. Who says they aren't deadly fugitives that will kill us the first chance they get? Or that they aren't agents of the idyllic order trying to sniff out rebels? Kiva looked back at the table where Malachite sat, and Evanora walked down the stairs to join him. Malachite offered her soup, and Evanora took 3 or 4 spoonfuls before handing it back. Kiva turned back to Franzi. Really? Them? She said with scorn. Franzi had never seen that side of her, only the bright, bubbly ball of sunlight that could make a room smile with just her presence. He was hurt and wasn't able to hide it well enough from her. Franzi, I don't want what happened to Miles to happen to them. I mean, he was just a boy, and he was so scared, and if we could have helped more, maybe... I don't know. I just know that for as long as I live, I'm not going to let that happen ever again, she said, so sure of herself. Franzi didn't know what else to say other than, you're right. I trust you. I probably shouldn't, but I do. I just hope you're not wrong. His voice was shaky. He could feel how selfish he was being, and it reminded him of his father. She was right. They can't let what happened to Miles happen again, not so soon. Kiva's face turned from scornful disappointment back to her normal bubbly self. Well, she giggled. I suppose we should go tell them that we are one big happy family now. Franzi watched her head back to the table, and slowly he walked after her. He knew, no matter what, her heart would always be in the right place. The only question was, how soon would it be until it got them in trouble?